Okay, good morning once again. Please turn with me to the book of Joshua, Joshua and chapter 24. Joshua chapter 24. Again, familiar passage, Joshua 24. One of the hardest things to do um, is to change a culture, change people's minds. One of the hardest things to do. And even after you have done so, it's even more difficult to maintain that change for generations. Difficult to do that. We're going to look at Israel here as an example and try and learn from their mistakes. Always maintain it's better for me at least for to learn from other people's mistakes and not have to experience it myself. I see somebody else do something and it will work out for them. I'm not going to see if I can do different. It happened to you, that means it might happen to me. Well, all right. I'm not going that road at all. Right? Chapter 24, this is Israel would have gone through, conquered, God would have led them victory after victory. But one of the things I like about God is God knows his people. God knows who you are, God knows who I am. He calls Israel together, as we saw in Exodus 13 to where we are at chapter 19 now. Time and time again, God did for them, and as they came up upon an obstacle, their mind went back to Egypt. And God delivered them again, and they just rinse and repeat. God knows how they are. Joshua is at the tail end of his life, so he would have seen them in Egypt, experience the struggles, experience the victories, see the people turn against God, see God forgive them, take them back, see them turn against God again. Joshua would have seen all of that. And I may be injecting my own thoughts here, but I believe as the one who would have been leading the people, there may have been some fear in Joshua, because I am at the end. What is going to happen when I'm gone? I want to make sure, I want to ensure that what we have stays, it is maintained. I want to ensure that. So God allows Joshua to call the people together in chapter 24, and then God gives them some history lessons, tells them about what God did for Abraham, what God did for Jacob, what God did for Esau, what God did for them, not just in the moment, but from generation after generation to this point. Joshua wanted to make sure they understand, and I promise I won't be long this morning. Right? He got to the point, verse 11, when you cross, Joshua 24, verse 11, when you cross the Jordan River and came to Jericho, the men of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, Jebusites, but I gave you victory over them. I, God, gave you victory over them. Not just only gave victory, I sent terror ahead of you to drive out the two kings of the Amorites. It was not your sword or your bows that brought you victory. I gave you land you had not worked on, and gave you tongues you did not build. The tongues where you are now living, I gave you vineyards, olive groves for food, though you did not plant them. Imagine that. God is saying to them, I did all of this throughout the generations, and for you, I gave you victory. Even though you fought with your swords and you shoot your arrows, it wasn't your sword, it wasn't your arrows, but I gave you victory. You fought in wars, and I did so much that kings heard about you coming and run. And you got land you didn't plant. You know what it is to have vineyards, olive trees. You move into a land, you move into a town, you move into a city you didn't build. No work at all. You get everything ready made. Easy, easy. God say, I do that. I do that for you. Let's be honest. If someone were to do that for us, give us a well-kept property with everything that we need to survive, give us a place to live, we ain't have to spend a dime, we have to lift a shovel, we don't have to do anything. How indebted would we be to that person? Would we, anything they ask, we willing to give to them? Yes or no? Yeah, and I mean that everything. I don't have to do nothing, and all of this is mine. You give that for me. I mean, anything, no problem at all. No problem at all. God remind them, that's what I have done for you. Listen to what Joshua then says, verse 14. So fear the Lord, serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. Serve the Lord alone. He did all that for you. Serve the Lord alone. Joshua then says to them, but if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today who you will serve. Would you prefer the gods of your ancestors, served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live? But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. God is fair. God is just. And God is honorable. God said to them, I did all that for you, but I'm still giving you a choice. Today, you have a choice. You serve me, fear me wholeheartedly, or choose otherwise. It's difficult, I know it's difficult, when you think someone would have done something and everything that you have now, this person in some way is responsible for that. So anything they ask, you're willing and you want to do for them. And I think maybe Israel felt that way. God has done so much for you. No, God, we want you. Sad thing is, as convincing as Israel sounded here, we all know it only lasts so long. But if we have to make some changes, if we are going to make these changes must have longevity. It mustn't just be us change and then you can go ahead to Judges chapter 2. Judges chapter 2. Turn to Judges chapter 2. Oh, I think it's verse 10. Judges chapter 2 and verse 10. And we'll end there. Israel promised God, because God brought it to their memory. God knows Israel. He gave them a choice again. You choose who you're going to serve. They agreed, we are going to serve you. Matter of fact, verse 16 of Joshua 24, you stay in Judges, I'm coming to meet you. The people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord is the one who rescued us and our ancestors from slavery in the land of Egypt. He performed mighty miracles before our very eyes. As we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies, He preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations living here in the land. So we too will serve the Lord, for He alone is our God. That is the people. Joshua then made sure they understand, hey, you said that, you are witnesses to yourself. He placed a stone next to the tabernacle so that they would remember that they said that. So with not just the choice was given, the people collectively agreed, we're going to serve. Judges chapter 2. After Joshua died, verse 10 says, after that generation died, Joshua's generation and those who would have made the agreement that we just read, that generation died. Another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things that He had done for Israel. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is that? The generation before. If we are to sustain the changes that we want to make, this generation is responsible for passing it on to the next one, preventing them from making the mistakes we made. I think I said it, not last week, sometime. There are some things that we would have learned from the generation before us. And I'm talking about myself, Justy, Quasi, those of us who would have spent our formative years. We are not going to point finger at them and say they did wrong. They did the best that they could with the information that they had. I thank God for them. They have brought me to the point where I can now read and study for myself and learn things for myself. But understanding where they fell short, not because they had good intentions. All that they did it with good intentions for the betterment of the church. They did that. They just didn't know better. They just didn't know better. If I know better, then I must do better. And I must try to teach you better. And when we know better and we do better, the generation that comes after us must not repeat the mistakes that we made, because my intention and our intention is not to repeat the mistakes that the generations before us made. When we do that, we're going to end up just like Israel. As a generation pass, forget God, forget all that He did for us. And then we just start the cycle again. Joshua told them in chapter 24, when you turn your back on God, He's going to punish you. And they say, no, we're not going to turn our back on God. We will never do that. He's going to be our only God. Yet, just one generation. You know what one generation is? That is Kwesi dying, and as Kwesi died, Kyla Kayla Marie in costume and feathers, Carnival Monday and Tuesday. Just one. He died and that is it. One generation. That's one generation died. And I mean the generation right after, what were you doing that your son or your daughter forget God clean? What were you doing? If you said we would serve you and no other God, you mean just one generation right after that? Poor Donaldin Clochiai and Dwight turn a bandit. Dwight selling drugs. Dwight is the biggest drug lord. Although I already got accused of being a drugsman from Muruga. But we could imagine that she died and that is it. Everything going on the hill. One generation. Israel did evil, verse 11, in the eyes of in the Lord's sight, and served images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshipping the gods of the people around them, and they angered the Lord. They abandoned the Lord to serve Baal, the images of Asherah. This made the Lord burn with anger against Israel. So He handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to their enemies all around, and they were no longer able to resist them. Every time Israel went out to battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be defeated, just as He had warned, and the people were in great distress. So the same God who said, I went before you and I put fear in your enemies, when they go out to war, the same God is fighting against them now, because they turned their backs on Him. Whose fault is that? The generation before. I want to see, but really, as for me and my house, say amen now. Say amen now. We are not going to make that mistake. We are not going to make that mistake. We are going to ensure, when our eyes close, the generation that comes after us going to maintain. And we are going to teach them to teach the generation after them. So that we want to talk about legacy. Let's forget saving money and having wealth. So that generations down the road, we have enough money. No. Spirituality, let that be our legacy. Service to God, let that be our legacy. Instead of thinking about handing down wealth, let's hand down a legacy of service to God. Because that is of more value than all the riches in the world. Because when you forget God, He starts to fight against you, and Paul had to find out. It's hard to kick against the pricks. They can't win that battle. We are going to make the changes we can make and ensure that is passed from this generation to the next and to the next. Long after we are gone, my hope is that Brasso is an example of what can be achieved if we serve God the way He deserves to be served and worshipped. Brother Curtis.